Okay, we just arrived here at Heathrow, and we're heading on that bus to Oxford to see Sonex. That should be a lot of fun. Okay, let's go. Okay, we're here in Sonex headquarters in England with Rod.
Hi, nice to see you.
And Nathan.
How you doing?
You guys happy to be on camera?
I'm delighted.
Of course you
love
are.
it. Just the naturals.
So Rod, I just want to get a sense of how you started this company and where it came from. I wonder if you can tell us quickly.
Well, going back in history, personally my background's electronics and physics and software. Did a degree in astronomy of all subjects. Did some research work in X-ray astronomy, and a lot of people ask me, how did you get from X-ray astronomy to audio? And the link is software computing. Mm-hmm. Moved to SSL. Mm-hmm. Spent 4 or 5 years working at SSL on their digital projects. Mm-hmm. Moved then to Sony and spent quite a long time working with Sony, primarily designing and building, part of a team, quite a large team, designing and building a thing called the OXF-R3, which was a big digital mixing console.
The Oxford, also called the Oxford.
The Oxford, indeed.
Yes.
A lot of people call it the Oxford. And you could have one if you had about $1 million in those days. You could have one of those. But that project matured after the years, went into production in Japan. We as a design team, of course, wanted to move on and do other things. And as Sony Oxford, we went on and did many things actually, but the most relevant, the most exciting, the one that we were involved with, this particular team, was taking some of the algorithms from the OXF-R3 and isolating them, keeping the algorithm, the maths the same, but putting a GUI on it and porting it towards one of the doors, one of the digital audio workstations. The primary one at the time, this is going back a few years now, probably about 7 or 8 years. The primary one, of course, at the time was Pro Tools. And the first plugin we did was an EQ, straight out of the R3, identical functionality, identical controls, identical performance. So very, very high quality, very low noise and distortion.
That's it there, running.
Indeed, that's a screenshot of it running under Cubase. The first plugin that we did was the EQ. It was at the time just for Pro Tools.
Right.
Over the years, of course, we've ported it off to other platforms. Cubase, you see it running over there on Cubase. Right. So we have VST versions of it.
Right.
We've also got RTAS versions and TDM versions for Pro Tools. And we have PowerCore versions as well in terms of enhanced plugins.
Right.
Audio units versions.
Cover everything.
Indeed.
And so you were involved with the original design of the EQ and the Oxford console.
I was involved with the design of some of the hardware for the console, some of the digital hardware, graphics cards, some of the front panel work, and some of the software. Mm-hmm. I wasn't myself involved in the development of the algorithm of the EQ, the filtering and things. Right. That was done by a couple of other people.
Would you say that the plugin works identically to the way it worked on a console? In a Pro Tools environment?
In terms of the performance, it's as identical as it's ever going to be a piece of digital software. You can measure it, you can measure the ins and measure what comes out of it, and it'll be effectively identical. Right. To be strictly accurate, everything is dependent on the processor chip that you're running the instructions on. Right. So there will be a slight difference in terms of the instructions nowadays that are running on a native computer and that are running on, say, a 56K for Pro Tools. Right. The chips that we used for the OXF-R3 for the digital mixing console were actually our own design, completely proprietary chip. So again, the actual instructions that were running to implement the algorithm were different from the chips that you're using nowadays. But if you wanted to measure it, you wouldn't detect a difference at all.
To all intents and purposes, you're getting an EQ second for $1 million console for a few $100s. So it's not an emulation of a classic piece of hardware, or it is the same code, if you like, as that classic console. So.
Now, I noticed another thing. What version of the EQ are we on here?
That would be a odd question.
Well, it's a very boring answer. I think it's 2.6.3 or something like that. Right?
So does that mean that the algorithm has been tweaked, or
Generally,
a little bit?
Generally not the algorithm. We do major version up if we find we need to support a new platform. For instance, when Pro Tools went from Pro Tools 6 to Pro Tools 7, for instance, we then would do a version up. Minor versions are if we find a bug or want to tweak something for some reason. But generally with a product that's as mature as the EQ, you wouldn't be finding a bug in the algorithm. You might be finding a redrawing bug in the graphics or something like that. It would be a fairly minor thing.
Most of the revs have been compatibility revisions. So really, I mean, it's really as it was. The sound is as it was. It's an 8-year-old EQ. I was having a conversation with someone at Music Messer actually, and they were saying, in such sort of life cycle of software is quite short, a year or two, and then the next thing comes out, the next thing comes out. And our EQ, 8 years is quite a long time, but it's kind of become a classic, and it's one of those, why change it if it sounds great, just leave it. It's like a classic piece of outboard EQ, if you like. 8 years is a long time in software, I suppose.
It is a long time, but it shows you how complete the algorithm is.
I guess people still love it.
Yeah. What would you say is the most successful plugin that you've had? Maybe apart from the EQ1, I'm sure the EQ was very successful.
Well, one that I would always point to, I think, would be the Inflator, which is a very simple plugin, very intuitive, can actually be operated with a single fader, so very easy for people to understand and to use. It's the classic makes everything louder plugin, gives you your extra 3 dB on your main mix, and it really is as simple as pull the fader up and you get your extra 3 or 4 dB.
There's something extra as well as some loudness. It kind of gives warmth and presence, and just brings stuff out of the speakers a little bit nearer, so you can put stuff back in the mix and bring stuff forwards. And yeah, it's a presence kind of control as well as loudness. It does a kind of numerous things, but it's one simple fader. A little magical tool.
I wonder if you can explain a little bit about that. How does it do that? I mean,
I wish I knew. Right?
it basically makes things louder and more defined.
Yes, it's a little bit of mathematical jiggery-pokery. I think is the.
That's as good as you
I
can
think
get.
that's the technical term we use is jiggery-pokery.
It's clever stuff. It looks very, very simple on the surface, but there's some clever stuff going on in there.
Have you ever had any feedback from users as to how they're using it, Nathan?
We've had all kinds of people using it in many different ways. There was one story of a post engineer who's a sound. He wrote music for score mixers, the words I was looking for. He was using an inflator on every single channel, like 96 channels, whole orchestration, and it just brought everything alive. And he said I bypassed them all, and he said it sounded like someone threw a big blanket over the speakers. Everything sounded really dull. You just kind of get used to working with it in, kind of. Which everything's good in subtle. You shouldn't push everything to the max too much, but everything's good in subtle doses, I think.
Right.